Oh, howdy, folks. You know, my pager has been absolutely blowing up. Everybody's been wanting to know, what poetry are you reading this summer? We just can't, we are on the edge of our sofas. We just can't wait to know what you've been reading. Well, I'd love to tell you about it. Now, you might be wondering first, what's going on with this ridiculous tire I've got going on right now? Folks, it's a heat crisis in southern New Mexico right now. It's 5,000 degrees out there. You better bet I'm indoors reading. So check it. We started this summer with French poet Guillevic, translated from the French into English by Denise Levertov. This was published in the late 60s. I appreciate that black and white book cover there. I'm just going to read one passage that really spoke to me. A live crow that's been cut in half, whose two red halves look at each other. That's you and us. A live crow that's been cut in half, whose two red halves look at each other. That's you and us. I feel like that every time I look at Facebook. Now, next up, I went over to a black poet, Ngoma Hill. I like the title of this book, I Didn't Come Here to Tap Dance. Ngoma Hill was born in Virginia. He fought in the Vietnam War and did a lot of poetry writing in Harlem. He's a living poet in Harlem. He was a peer of Amiri Baraka. He's a musician, pretty cool dude. Some of the poems that I appreciated most in here had to do with the Vietnam War. Also appreciate his take on modern Christianity. What he talks about in many of these poems is how in his belief that Christianity came from Egyptian religions. For example, I question that book you call the Bible, wondering who we should hold liable for the survival of these lies, distorted scriptures in disguise. Heru was the sun god misinterpreted as God's son. Make sure you look closely, you can see Asor, Aset, and Heru, the Holy Trinity. As written in the book of Coming Forth by Day, Greeks call it Biblios Helios. Its real name is the Sun Book. So Asar is another name for Osiris, Aset is another name for Isis, Heru is Horus, and these are deities in the ancient Egyptian religion. And he comes back to this in many poems in this book, just sort of where he's tracing in his mind where Christianity came from and what it rose out of. So that was pretty interesting. However, my favorite poems in here had to do with Vietnam and his experiences from the Vietnam War, Ngoma Hill. Now, next up, continuing or hanging in the 70s here, I was born in 1975, and I gravitate toward music from that year, especially wuss jazz right there in the middle of that 70s. And I gravitate toward poetry. I love this book cover. I found this in Strand Books in New York City. It's just sort of to me, a little sexual on this book cover. And it's by Daniel Halpern. Now, some of these poems I don't think are going to play super great after the Me Too movement. However, I really enjoyed this book, some of this stuff. Let me share one of my favorite little poems out of here. I think that you will like this, and then this doesn't have anything to do with women really. The Grasshopper. Mokhtar sat in his favorite cafe on the Rue de la Plague and smoked his keef. As the old countrywomen passed with their vegetables, he lighted pipe after pipe. When the last of his tea was finally gone, he got up and walked down to the Avenue d'Espagne, where he came upon a grasshopper eating an onion. He got down on his hands and knees to have a closer look and noticed that tears were coming from the grasshopper's eyes. The onion got smaller and smaller as the tiny mandibles worked around it like spider legs. Mokhtar stared, and the grasshopper kept eating and weeping until the onion was gone. Really liked that image of that grasshopper eating that onion and crying, and the character in this poem getting down and looking at that grasshopper so closely to see the grasshopper's tears, and then how this poem just spends so much space and time honoring those tears of that grasshopper. I found that poem really, really rewarding and fun for me. A lot of travel poems in here. And again, I guess I'm just most interested in the 70s vibe. Daniel Halpern. Now, hey, where did we go next? Ireland. We went over to Ireland to check out some John O'Donohue. I learned about this dude from the podcast On Being. Some cool stuff. Hey, sonnet fans. Where's my sonnet fans? Because there's a whole batch, what do we call them? A sequence of sonnets that are very religious. For example, in these sonnets, they're called the Rosary sonnets. Like the Nativity, the Finding in the Temple, the Crowning with Thorns. So some really famous stuff out of the Bible that he writes these sonnets. That wasn't my favorite parts of this book. I appreciate the skill it takes to craft a sonnet. However, some of the cool parts I really liked. He's got 2 poems in this book called Breakage, and they're just real little 2-liners. These really interested me, and especially now that I'm coming back to it, I'm finding them really cool again. Like, check this one. Here's just 2 lines from one of these 2 breakage poems. Found letters, too late, the shock of who she was. Another really sweet line that I'm going to probably steal out of this book, I'm going to borrow it, is, check this out. Boy, if this line just gets me going. Our imprint, no deeper than breath on a mirror. That's, our imprint, no deeper than breath on a mirror. So folks, I have been busy. I got 3 more books to tell you about that I've been reading this summer, and summer just got a couple more weeks for me. Now look, hey, Matthew Dickman. Or sorry, I've got that wrong. That was his brother. His brother's name is Matthew Dickman, also a poet. They're out of Portland, Oregon. This is actually Michael Dickman. Matthew and Michael are brothers. But this book is actually about the suicide of Michael and Matthew's half-brother, whose name is Darren Hull, that committed suicide in 2007. I really, really enjoyed this book. It was very weird and dreamy. It's called Flies, this book. Why is it dreamy? Well, it's based on dreams that Michael was having after the suicide of his half-brother. And there's just a lot of white space in here, which I really appreciate. They're fragmented, like my boy Louis Warsh. I think his first name is Louis, but I love this kind of fragmented, weirdo poetry, and he keeps on coming back to these flies. Highly recommend this book. This is not rhymed. This is going off in several different directions at once. This is surprising. This is not a sonnet. Okay, hold on. Let me just read a couple lines that I liked. Here's one from Killing Flies. Now, again, he was dreaming a lot about flies after the suicide of his half-brother. Let me just read this first page of this one. Killing Flies. I sit down for dinner with my brother again. This is the last dream I ever want to have. Passing the forks around the table, passing the knives. One thing I want to know is who's in the kitchen right now if it isn't me. It isn't me. The kitchen is full of flies. Flies are doing all the work. They light on the edge of the roasted chicken, the bone china. That's what they do. Light. I really enjoy some of these lines, like this last line here. Light. Really like that. I really like this line. I wonder who's in the kitchen. Next line. It isn't me. I wonder who's in the kitchen if it isn't me. Next line. It isn't me. You know, in poetry where every single word matters, every order matters, all of it matters. It's also a stylistic ballsy choice to do one-word lines, or as Bukowski, one-syllable lines. And I really appreciate the risk here. And for me, this was a very successful book. Not my favorite, though. We're getting to my favorite out of all these. I enjoyed reading these, and I was plowing through it. My coworker Lynn Hurd lent me this John Updike book, The Centaur. I can't quite get into that fiction, baby. Got to keep that poetry going. All right, I got 2 more for you. Thanks for listening. I know y'all are just dying to know what I'm reading. Now, how about Zen poet Jane Hirshfield? She doesn't want you to call her a Zen poet. But man, this was released the day before America went into the COVID lockdown. I love this book cover. Y'all take a look at that book cover. I love how it looks like this ledger paper is popping out at you. I love how we have straight lines up here from a notebook and then like topo lines down here. Really, really like that. This book starts strong. I also learned about this book from Krista Tippett's On Being podcast. But it starts just strong as crap. And, I think a lot of the poems were good. Here's just a little bit. I'll read one called Practice. I touch my toes. When I was a child, this was difficult. Now I touch my toes daily. In 2012, in Sanford, Florida, someone nearby was touching her toes before bed. 3 weeks ago, in the Philippines or Myanmar, someone was stretching. Tomorrow, someone elsewhere will bend first to one side, then the other. I also do 10 push-ups, morning and evening. Women's push-ups from the knees. They resemble certain forms of religious bowing. In place of 1, 2, 4, 7, I count the names of incomprehension. Sanford, Ferguson, Charleston, Aleppo, Sarajevo, Nagasaki. I never reached Troy. I have done this for years now. Bystander, listener, one of the lucky. I do not seem to grow stronger. Really appreciate her ability to where this poem went, just from the simple acts of stretching. You know, many of us do this on the floor. My yoga mat's right there, down there. I got all kind of creaks and pains and stuff in my back. I'll be down there stretching, doing my physical therapy every day, just by myself. And I think there's lots of people that are doing all kind of stretching. In the airport, every other person sitting here doing their neck like this, and their shoulders. Everybody's all tense as hell. And so this poet's talking about this. And then just to get into there, what she's not counting her stretches, she's thinking about the incomprehensible. Ferguson, Sarajevo. I really like how she just goes and covers all those things. So this was a pretty cool book. Hey, some of y'all have been following my social media closely. I know. This is ballsy. My silence. Do you see that? That's a whole empty page there. So I thought that was fun. Now, hey, pencil roll. My favorite book so far, and I'm right now reading it, just right in the middle of it, is this Sharon Olds, Strike Sparks. Holy crap, y'all. Love it. Just love this. She writes a lot about her family. She does not do extended metaphors. There's lots of figurative language in here, but she's not afraid to flip it up. 2-3 lines, she'll be a simile, a completely different simile. These aren't image systems necessarily, so much as she's just doing whatever she needs to do at whatever moment. Man, last night I was reading her one about birth. Let me read this one about birth. This is a selected poems that pulls poems from a lot of her books. Nobody's still watching this. 14 minutes. Give me Staley. Who you kidding? Your students don't even pay attention more than 1 minute. In what world do you think somebody's sitting around watching 14 minutes of you talking about poetry books? So this is just an exercise for me. But I'm going to go ahead and just finish up this poem. This is about the birth. Most of y'all were born from a vagina. Some of y'all were born like that dude in Macbeth, untimely ripped from a cesarean section. Some of y'all dang petri dish. But this one I really like from the perspective of the mama pushing out this baby. And I'm going to end here with this poem. Here we go. This is Sharon Olds. This is my top pick out of all this poetry I've been telling you about. My top pick here. Sharon Olds, Strike Sparks, collected selected poems 1980 to 2002. And this one's called The Moment the Two Worlds Meet. That's the moment I always think of. When the slick whole body comes out of me. When they pull it out. Not pull it, but steady it as it pushes forth. Not catch it, but keep their hands under it as it pushes out. They are the first to touch it, and it shines. It glistens with the thick liquid on it. That's the moment. While it's sliding, the limbs compressed close to the body, the arms bent like a crab's cloud muscle legs, the legs folded like the wings of a chicken. That's the center of life, the moment when the juiced bluish sphere of the baby is sliding between the two worlds, wet like sex. It is sex. It is my life opening back and back as you strip the reed from the bud. Not strip it, but watch it thrust so it peels itself and the flower is there, severely folded, and then it begins to open and dry. But by then the moment is over. They wipe off the grease and wrap the child in a blanket and hand it to you entirely in this world. Keep reading, y'all.